What's up, hockey fans, and welcome to the Wraparound brought to you by the Hockey News. I'm your host, Emma Lingan. I'm joined today by Michael Augello and John Bailey of the Hockey News, coming at you as we do every Tuesday and Thursday to talk about the latest and greatest from around the NHL in bite-sized portions. But before we do get into all of that news, playoff related and otherwise, do want to remind you that for over 75 years, the Hockey News has been the ultimate hockey fix. Now you can get 12 issues delivered straight to you, packed with stories, stats, and a bonus gift issue to kick things off. Head over to thn.com and get in on the action. All right, Mike, we got to start today with your Buffalo Sabres. They opened up their second round series against the Montreal Canadiens with a 4-2 win in game one. So, goaltender for the Sabres, Alex Lyon, made 26 saves. He's now 4-1 with a .950 save percentage and 1.3 goals against average in these playoffs. So, how surprising has this season been for Lyon? Not just obviously in the postseason, but throughout the regular season as well. Do you think he's proven that he can be a goaltender on a cup contending team?
That's yet to be determined. I mean, he's played very well this year, but he's had a couple of injuries, and they've used three goaltenders this year. They've used Colton Ellis at times and Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen before the end of the regular season seemed to be the number one and did start the first two games. But after that bloop goal in game two, that was I think, not to say that they may not go back to him, but right now Lyon has played fantastic. And Buffalo learned their lesson from game one of the series against Boston, where they were very tentative and trailed 2-0 before coming back in the last 10 minutes of the third period and scoring 4 goals to win 4-3 it ended up being. But last night they jumped on the Canadiens. They really put the pedal to the metal on them. They got the early goal. They got a second goal on the power play. And then really Montreal was on their heels for most of the night. So I think the Sabres really effectively played a different style team that they played in round one, because Boston's more of a physical and defensive minded team, but it didn't seem to phase them. Actually, I think they thrived against them. So right now Buffalo is in a good position.
Well, and when it comes to goaltending, John, of course, you always want to ride the hot hand, right? Especially in the playoffs. So how surprised have you been by what Alex Lyon has done, or have you been surprised by what he's done for the Sabres? And do you see him continuing to get that starter's net?
Yeah, I think as long as he plays well, it's his net. Like Mike said, Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen started the first two, had the, mistake in the second game, and, that was it. Lindy Ruff's been around a while, so he knows, when it's time to pull the plug and make a change. Alex Lyon's been in Philly. He's always had the talent, so I'm not surprised to see him playing well. Is he a starter? I mean, he's in his 30s now, and, we see a lot. Sometimes goalies get hot, and then they just take over. We saw it, with Binnington a couple years ago, and, Ville Husso, that 1 year in St. Louis was really good. With the Flyers with Michael Leighton in 2010. So it kind of happens that way. Like Mike said, it's probably too early to, crown him like a number one goalie, especially with Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen still there, and, his age and his contract status. But for me, I'm not surprised at all to see him playing well, because I know he's had the talent.
Well, and Mike, you mentioned Montreal, how they were really kind of playing back on their heels, especially at the end of that game in game one. And unfortunately, this is something that we've talked about on the show before, weeks ago, and it has not improved. So the Canadiens' top performers, their top line of Cole Caulfield, Nick Suzuki, and Uri Slafkovsky have combined for just one even strength goal and one even strength point. That's 8 games into the playoffs. So not just in this series, this is going back to the first round as well, which, mind you, went 7 games. So it didn't end up costing the Canadiens in the first round, of course, against Tampa Bay. But Mike, how important do you think this is going to be for them to actually get going against the Sabres? And in your opinion, why do you think they're struggling so much?
I think it's vital, and we've talked about it all year that they didn't have a second line center, at least a consistent second line center, and they didn't go out at the deadline and find one. They've been plugging holes with guys like Alex Newhook and now Philip Deneau, who's more of a defensive center. And they full marks to them and them beating Tampa Bay. But I think, like I said, I think Buffalo was popping champagne corks when they were playing, and then they found out they were going to play the Canadiens, because Tampa Bay is a veteran, experienced Stanley Cup winning team, and Montreal is a young team with a lot of talent. But they're a one-line offensive team. And it's like I said in my article for Hockey News today, that will Marty St. Louis maybe shake up the lines and maybe split up Slavkovsky, Suzuki, and Caulfield, get a second line going? Because if you go into a series with a one-line offensive attack and they can shut them down, which Buffalo did in game one, it's going to be tough for them. Plus, if Jakub Dobiš continues to, he had a great series against Tampa Bay, but it was 4 goals on 16 shots. If he plays like that, it could be a sweep.
Yeah, a lot of surprises, some good and some bad, about these Montreal Canadiens in the playoffs. John, what do you think the problem has been, in your opinion, for these guys who are supposed to be the top guys for Montreal just not getting going? And do you see it happening for them against Buffalo?
I think they're probably more likely to get it going against Buffalo than they were against Tampa Bay, just with the nature of Tampa Bay being so experienced, and they have a lot on the back end, a lot of talent. So for me, I think they can. If I was Marty St. Louis, I'd probably consider splitting them up. I think if you can get someone going with Demidov, that would help a little bit. I think if they can't get it going, it's probably going to be a short series, because like Mike said, they don't have a lot of offensive depth. Right. Kirby Dach was supposed to be maybe that, second line center, but it kind of hasn't worked out. So they're kind of just going with it. But, I've seen this movie before with the one line team with, the Devils last year with the Hurricanes, when Jack Hughes was out. You had Hischier and Brattenmeyer, and then, if the Hurricanes can stop that, then the rest of the team is not going to score. And that was a very short series. So that's what I could see happening here if they don't start scoring goals.
Yeah, you can become very predictable, very beatable that way very quickly. All right, shifting out west, the Anaheim Ducks, they evened up their series against the Vegas Golden Knights with a 3-1 win in game 2. The Ducks' offensive stars, unlike Montreal, they really stood out in this game for Anaheim. Leo Carlsson and Beckett Seneca each scored, despite the team going 0 for 5 on the power play. Mind you, they're now 0 for 9 on the power play in the series. So not exactly a recipe for success there, but still got your top guys going. Lucas Dostal stopped 23 shots. He gave up just 1 goal, which came with 6 seconds remaining in the game. So almost a shutout, 6 seconds shy of a shutout for him. Mike, have the Ducks adapted quicker to playoff hockey, you think, than a lot of us expected, especially after that high scoring series against Edmonton? You're facing a very different opponent now in Vegas, and this would, I think Vegas would be considered the more experienced opponent here, and Anaheim is new to these playoffs. Most of these guys have never played in playoffs before. So how do you think they've adapted to this style of play?
Well, I think Joel Quenneville has probably drilled it into their head that if they're going to beat Vegas, they have to sort of beat Vegas at their own game, because Vegas is a very good, experienced, defensively sound team. And with Tortorella taking over from Bruce Cassidy, I think he's probably just adapted some of the things that Cassidy was doing with just a different voice. But Anaheim, they're younger, they're faster. And if they play more disciplined, and like in game 2, they got the goaltending from Dostal. I thought one of the main reasons that they lost game 1 was Dostal wasn't particularly strong. I think they only had 16 shots on him in that game 1. So if they get the goaltending and they get the offense, which they did in game 2, then I think they're in good shape. I mean, they're going to make this a series. Do I think they're going to win it? I don't know. I think they're a more highly evolved young team than Utah was, and Vegas had trouble with Utah, so that's why I gave Anaheim an outside chance. And oh, by the way, Mitch Marner -3 in that game.
Knew it was going to come up. John, what do you make of what the Ducks have done these playoffs? Obviously, against Edmonton, a little bit different situation. They were playing very hurt and, were not a defensively deep team at all. Now against Vegas, and, they're still finding ways to succeed. So what do you think of the way that Anaheim has adapted to this playoff style of hockey?
Yeah, it's two very different opponents. Like we found out McDavid playing with basically one leg. And like we said, Edmonton's never really been a great defensive team with McDavid. So it's a different challenge for sure with Vegas. Goaltending, for Vegas is a bit of a question still. I think Carter Hart's been playing better, and he's taken over for Aiden Hill. But I just love the Ducks talent. Like I love Carlson, Beckett Seneca, all those guys, Jackson Lacombe. I think something maybe people aren't talking about enough when it comes to playing against an experienced team like Vegas is the additions they made, like Chris Kreider, Trouba. They still have Gudis. So those guys have been there and done it, and I think that's probably helping the younger guys along. For me, I really think they could take the series. I mean, like I said, I love the talent. They're definitely younger and faster. As long as, the defense and the goaltending holds up like it's mostly been, I think they could do it.
Yeah, definitely at least an outside chance, like Mike said. Unfortunately, one thing they are going to need to clean up is the power play numbers. Of course, as I mentioned, 0 for 9, but that's a good thing for the Golden Knights, who haven't exactly put themselves in a good position to win with their lack of discipline so far. So Vegas committed 3 penalties in the first 6 minutes of game 2. That includes a double minor for high sticking by Jack Eichel. That resulted in the Ducks playing with the man advantage for more than 6 straight minutes in that first period. So, Mike, do you think the penalties for Vegas are a result of them being outpaced by that faster, younger Ducks team? And how much longer do you think they can rely on their penalty kill, even though Anaheim is struggling on the power play?
I think they're born a little bit out of frustration. I saw the Keegan Colasar penalty in I think it was the second period, and that was just it was a dumb play by a veteran player, and it's going to come back to bite them because if you looked at the Anaheim Edmonton series, the big thing for Anaheim, I think they went 50% on the power play. I think they went like 8 for 16 or something like that. Now they're not having that kind of success against Vegas because Vegas has good penalty killers and are a sound defensive team. Marner, for all my criticism of him, is a very good penalty killer. But, eventually if they continue to be undisciplined, they're going to get bitten, and that could swing the series. So, I mean, with the Golden Knights, I mean, I didn't think Carter Hart was particularly strong in this game, and he's right now the number one. They have not gone to Aiden Hill. They're probably going to stick with him because Tortorella knows him from Philadelphia. But if Anaheim's power play gets on track, it might be curtains for the Golden Knights.
Yeah, I mean, John, you're high on Anaheim for this series. So do you think that the lack of discipline from Vegas is going to play into that ultimately in the end result here?
Yeah, I think, when that's not a game John Tortorella wants to play. Covering him here with the Flyers, he'll tolerate, standing up for your guys and things like that. But when you get to, making, stupid mistakes and, unnecessary, penalties, like Mike said with the Colasar thing, he's not going to really stand for that. Whether or not they take his message and they make that adjustment, we'll have to see. But, Anaheim, they have too much talent, to stay dormant on the power play for so long. And, I think if you keep playing with fire, you're going to get burned. And Carter Hart hasn't had a great year, so, and neither has Aiden Hill. So no matter who you get in net, they're very vulnerable. Hart is, like I said, has been better. But it's only a matter of time, I think, before Anaheim breaks through, and I don't know that Vegas is going to be able to keep up with that once they do.
Well, speaking of being vulnerable in net, we saw the Minnesota Wild go to Philip Gustafson in net for game 2 against the Avalanche. That was his first start of the playoffs. They had been going with the young goaltender, Jesper Wallstedt. So obviously for Gustafson, the Avalanche still continued to score at will. They put up 4 goals against him on 22 shots, so ended up not exactly being the answer they were looking for here. So, Mike, if you were in charge, if you were John Hines, which goaltender would you go to throughout the rest of this series between Minnesota and Colorado? Because I mean, how reliant can the Wild continue to be on their goaltending in order to get back into this series, which they're now down 2-0?
I understand the methodology of going to Gustafson after Wallstedt gave up 9 goals, but I don't think that was on Wallstedt. I think that was on a pitiful defensive performance by the Minnesota Wild. And I mean, I think that's proved out by what happened in game 2, because there's a reason they went to Wallstedt. Wallstedt is the better goaltender. I think this year, he has been more statistically, and I think performance-wise, he's been the better of the 2 goaltenders. So, if it was a case of, maybe Wallstedt was gassed after playing, 6 games against Dallas and then playing the first game against Colorado, and they needed to give him a break and go with Gustafson, then I would go back to Wallstedt. If there was an injury, then you probably have to stick with Gustafson. But if all things being equal, I would go back to Wallstedt in game 3.
John, you agree?
Yeah, I'm in agreement there. I mean, I think Gustafson's a good goalie, but Wallstedt coming in to this series was playing great. At the same time, if I was John Hines too, I look at the 2 goalies and which one is my future of the Wild? It's Wallstedt. So you took him out. Gustafson played 1 game and he got torched as well. So for me, you go back to Wallstedt. You say, all right, you got torched 1 game. You gave up 8 or whatever it was. Here's your game off, your mental reset, and now we need you to go back in and be strong.
All right. Well, we'll see what decision is made there as Minnesota looks to get back into this series against Colorado before it is too late. Shifting away from playoff related news, I want to talk about the salary cap. So the NHL and the Players Association officially announced the upper salary cap limit in 2026-27 is going to be $104 million. So since the maximum salary a player can have is 20% of the current cap, the maximum allowed player salary now is going to be over 20 million. So, Mike, what team currently do you think is going to benefit the most this offseason from this rising cap, and who can you see earning the biggest contract this summer, RFA or UFA? Because like we've talked about, the UFA market is already picked pretty clean.
Yeah, I don't know if there's going to be one team that benefits, but it's going to be the usual suspects when it comes to who's going to spend up to the cap. It's going to be Philadelphia, it's going to be Toronto, it's going to be the Rangers, Boston, Montreal, the big market teams that are willing to go up to the limit. But as you said, Emma, this free agent class stinks. I mean, the main beneficiaries will be Alex Tuch, who I still believe is not going to be back with Buffalo unless they come up to pay him. And it'd probably be more than $10 million now because the cap is going up. And Darren Radish, who is a right shot defenseman who scored 20 goals. Anybody who signs Darren Radish, and this is not an attack against him, he had a great year, and right-handed defensemen are really a rare commodity. I think Toronto and Philadelphia are probably going to bankrupt themselves going out to sign Darren Radish, and he's a 30-year-old guy who had a career year. I think it's a mistake waiting to happen, but somebody's going to make that mistake. But players like that in a very bad free agent pool are going to get overpaid.
Happens every year, and I think it's definitely going to happen, especially with the cap going up. Like you said, John, which players or teams do you see benefiting the most in this offseason, in particular, this upcoming offseason, from the rising cap?
Well, selfishly, I think I'll stay local and I'll go with the Flyers. We talk a lot about them looking to do some kind of big swing and, get some top 6 center or another, really good top 4 defenseman. They have the draft capital to do it. They have the money to spend to pay him, whoever it is, whether it's an RFA or someone they trade for that needs a contract, whatever the case may be. New Jersey too, they've been, up against the cap a lot and they need some help. And I also San Jose, I think, when we talk about Darren Radish, I think that's probably a team that's going to be interested just because, they have a lot at forward and not a lot of defense. And I think they need to spend like something like $15 million just to get to the floor. So, if they want to get all the top dogs or, whatever is left that you would consider a top dog in this class, more power to them to just go and throw money at whoever they want because they have all the space in the world to do it. And I think Radish is probably a good fit for them. But yeah, like Mike said, a lot of the big market teams, but also I think the Flyers want to do stuff. The Devils definitely need to do stuff. And the Sharks can do basically whatever they want as long as they can pull it off.
When you look at a team like Pittsburgh, too, also has a lot of guys departing in free agency. So they're probably going to be looking to either re-sign those players or go out and get some others, the ones that are left. But teams are going to need to get to that floor, like you said. Not a bad problem to have, though, I think. So shifting away from the NHL for a second, I want to talk about the PWHL. We got some big news from the Professional Women's Hockey League this week. Announced they're going to expand to Detroit for the 2026-27 season. So league also announced that the upcoming PWHL draft is going to be held in Detroit. More changes are expected to come to the PWHL soon. Reports this week are indicating that the league is looking to add as many as 4 new franchises for this upcoming season. So that would bring the total number of teams to 12. We've talked about expansion for this league before, about threading that needle and about following the right timeline, not trying to get too big too quickly here. But Mike, what do you think of Detroit, first of all, as an addition to the league? And where else can you see an expansion team landing next?
Well, Detroit makes a lot of sense, and this might be the best chance for a team in Detroit to actually make the playoffs. But I think you look at the league right now, and you have 4 Canadian teams. I don't know whether they want to expand more in Canada at this point, but if you go 4 Canadian and 8 American, and you expand to markets like now Detroit, in the central, Minnesota is already there. If you expand to Chicago, St. Louis. I know Buffalo had a team in one of the previous leagues. I think they'd probably be interested again. There's enough room for expansion. I don't think they want to go too south or too west because travel will be a factor. But I do see markets that are traditional hockey markets: Pittsburgh, Philadelphia. If you go northeastern corridor and those, Washington D.C. I think there's a lot of markets there, and I think they should be careful about expanding too early, too quickly, but clearly they're wanting to strike while the iron is hot.
Well, we've already seen them go west. They've expanded to Seattle and Vancouver, but it seems like you've got kind of, like you said, like these 2 pockets. They're clustered a little bit. So more expanding towards Midwest maybe might make the most sense. And Detroit starting to creep into that direction. But John, what do you think of Detroit, first of all, and as a expansion franchise? And what are your thoughts or predictions about where this league could go next?
Yeah, I love the landing spot of Detroit. Obviously a storied hockey city up there in Michigan. I know a lot of people who are Red Wings fans, my friends who are, thrilled that they got a team. So I think it's a great move. It's a great start for the league. For me, I would like to see, I've had a lot of friends say that they would like to see Philadelphia at some point. And I think Philadelphia would be up for it. I mean, we just lost the Wings, the lacrosse team, but at the same time, we have, a new stadium coming, like a new, kind of complex with the new arena that'll be coming in, I think, a few years down the road. So if you could get a team to come in with that, I mean, it's probably a lot to share an arena, but, the Devils do it with the Sirens. So I think Philadelphia would be really happy to get a team. I think all the fans would be interested. It's, you've got the Eagles, the 76ers, the Flyers are back in the playoffs. So there's a lot of sports that are coming together. The Phillies too. A lot of sports coming together. A lot of good seasons from all the different teams coming, back to back to back. If you could add another one to that, I think the city would be very happy.
Yeah, Pittsburgh, I think, would be another interesting one, another good landing spot. I know Mike warned against heading too far south, but I think, even a place like Carolina, Raleigh could use it. Even Nashville. I mean, the Predators ownership did their bid for a WNBA team did not go through, so they are looking to expand into the women's sports realm. So could be an option down the road here, at least. Maybe not immediately, but at some point. And it's great to see the league continue to grow. All right, back to the NHL now. I want to talk about the Norris Trophy. So Rasmus Dahlin, Cale Makar, Zach Werenski, those are your finalists for the Norris Trophy. They were announced today. Based on their resumes from the season, obviously keeping in mind that it's a regular season award, Mike, who do you think is the most deserving of the award this year?
Well, first, I'll just say I was a little surprised because, Evan Bouchard was not on the list, but, defense is part of the award. So there you go. But the one who surprised me not being on there was Quinn Hughes. And if you look at the statistics, he only had 7 goals. And I think compared to all the other defensemen who were in double figures, I think that was the mark against him. Of the list, Dahlin had a career year, a career high in points. With 74. He had a great year, and the personal tragedies that he went through, and that is one of the reasons he's a finalist for the Masterton. But I think realistically it's between Makar and Werenski, and because Makar has won the award multiple times, I think this might be Werenski's year. He was almost the entire reason why Columbus was in the playoff race going into the last few weeks of the season. And I think the assist on the Jack Hughes goal in the Olympics probably doesn't hurt him too much with American writers. So I would say that Werenski is going to win.
Yeah, I mean, Werenski came close last year too, and you've really seen the impact that he's had for Columbus. It's funny that you mentioned Quinn Hughes not being in this group of finalists. When I did my ballot for this award, I actually went through and just kind of on gut feeling, just first went through and added my names in, and then I go back and kind of look and adjust. And I realized my first pass through on the Norris, for 5 names on there, I didn't even have Quinn Hughes in my first round. So I think it speaks to the level of defensive talent that you're seeing in the league right now. But John, when you look at these 3 guys who are the finalists, any surprises, first of all, from your point of view? And then, who do you think? Do you agree that it might be Werenski's year?
Yeah, I mean, Quinn is the obvious one. I think Bouchard and, maybe Lane Hudson could be in there too. But, you can only pick 3 and they're all phenomenal players. I'm going to go against the green, though, and I would say that my pick would be Rasmus Dahlin ahead of Makar and Werenski. I look at the Sabres and I look at, where they were, in the basement and, coming all the way back to life and, going to the top of the Atlantic and making the playoffs for the first time in forever. And, like Mike said too, this stuff that he went through with his fiance, it's a lot, but it's really inspiring, both on a personal level and a professional level to see how he went from, where the team was and, how he dragged them to the playoff race. I think it's his time. I think he deserves it.
Well, hard to argue that any of the 3 guys don't deserve at least a second thought and consideration for this award. Really impressive seasons from all 3. But John, since we've got you here today, I want to talk to you about the Flyers. Of course, they recalled 2024 first-round pick Jett Luchanko from his OHL team in Brantford this week. He's been practicing with the team, but Rick Tocchet said that he's only going to play in case the team suffers any further injuries in these playoffs. So we already know Noah Cates has been ruled out for the rest of the series against Carolina. Owen Tippett's been out since Game 6 against Pittsburgh with an undisclosed injury. We don't really know what the situation is there. But with how well the Flyers' young players have been playing in the playoffs so far, do you think it would be a good opportunity for Luchanko to join the lineup against the Hurricanes in this series, or do you think it is too soon?
I do. His season in the OHL just ended, I think, 2 days ago. So I'm not going to ask the kid to, turn around, go from junior and, skip the AHL. College is a different story, but, to jump up all those different levels, then to go to the NHL and then the NHL playoffs, you're going up like 4 notches. So I'm not going to throw him in there, after 2 days and, say, here you go. But, my view is if they lose game 3, they're down 3-0. You don't have much to lose, for game 4 at that point. And it's not like he hasn't seen the NHL before. He's got, I think, 8 games of experience. I think when Tocchet says that, if it comes down to further injuries, I think he's referring to Christian Dvorak, who I believe is a game time decision for game 3. But, like I said, for me, I think regardless, if you're looking at game 4 and you're down 3-0, it's probably a good spot to get him in. If you listen to the Flyers and, how they talk about how valuable this experience is for all their young players, I think if you view Luchanko as part of that group for your future that needs the experience, get him the experience because, next year he might be starting in the AHL. So, who knows when he's going to be back in his spot. Same thing with David Jiricek. Jiricek's been, in the press box most of the time. They've gone with Andre. They've gone with Juleson. But, when you go down 3-0, pressure's off. They get the kids a game and see if they could do something for you.
Mike, what do you think?
Yeah, I don't see a downside if they're down 3-0 to throw a kid in there and give them a chance to gain some valuable experience. I've seen it over the years with players who are like, I remember and this is going back in Leaf history, Daniel Marois comes right out of junior and goes into the playoffs against, I think it was Detroit, and scored a goal. So, I mean, if they're down 3-0, it's a no lose. But I mean, the reason right now the Flyers are in such a dire position is, look who their leading scorer is. It's Rasmus Ristolainen. Look who their second leading scorer is. It's Jamie Drysdale. Their forwards are just not scoring. Now you have Cates and you have Tippett out. Tyson Forster, who came back from injury late in the season, has no points in 8 games. And maybe Rick Tocchet should learn the lesson, and maybe you should play Matvei Michkov more than 12 minutes a game because you need offense.
Yeah, it's certainly do need offense to beat this Carolina Hurricanes team. We've talked about how it looks like, I mean, they could very well be the team to beat in the East this year. So definitely a tough task ahead for the Flyers. We'll see if Jett Luchanko does get into a game here, maybe in game 4. So we'll see what happens there. Of course, if you want to read any more about the Flyers, about the playoffs, the PWHL, any of the topics or players or teams that we've talked about here today, head over to the Hockey News. It's been the go-to for all things hockey since 1947. 12 issues packed with game and player insights, plus a free issue to start. It's a must-have for any fan. Head to thn.com/free and grab your subscription today. That's going to do it for today's episode of the Wraparound. Thank you so much to everyone who tuned in and listened to us talking some hockey today. We really do appreciate it. We'll be back with an all-new episode next Tuesday. For now, for Michael Augello and John Bailey, I'm Emma Lingan. This is the Wraparound, and we will see you next time.